The first time we showed them what a human fleet could do, I was there. I wasn't the commander. I wasn't even a high-ranking officer. I was just a gunnery sergeant aboard the ISS Resolute. And I had the best seat in the galaxy for watching fear get born. They were called the Javer Dominion. 42 alien species bound under one banner of conquest. They'd rolled through half the Orion Arm in 3 centuries. Every battle they fought, they won. Every enemy they met, they either absorbed or erased. And when they finally came knocking at Earth's doorstep, they didn't even bring their full strength. They thought we'd fold. They thought the humans were just another soft little species hiding behind technology we didn't even invent. They didn't understand we'd been fighting wars before we learned how to walk on the moon. Our first fleet wasn't massive. 12 heavy cruisers, a handful of destroyers, and a carrier loaded with strike wings. They outnumbered us 8-1. Their ships were sleeker, newer, dripping with alien engineering that had centuries on ours. Didn't matter. I still remember the calm silence before the first shot. We could hear our own breathing in our helmets. Our captain, old enough to have fought in the Europa rebellions, stood there like a statue at the tactical table. Then he gave the order, and hell opened. The Resolute's rail guns tore their lead in half before they even locked onto us. Our fighters swarmed like hornets, burning their way through the enemy's flanks. Their shields weren't ready for weapons that hit like meteor impacts at relativistic speeds. And we weren't ready for how easily it all happened. 30 minutes later, half their fleet was drifting wreckage. The other half ran, not tactical withdrawal. They ran, left their dead, left their crippled ships, left everything. We thought that was the end of it. It wasn't because when their High Council got the battle reports, they didn't see 12 human warships. They saw a predator they'd never met before, a species that didn't fight for survival like prey, but for victory like an apex killer. And the thing about predators, they don't stop. I didn't know it then, but our first fleet was just the warning shot. Command was already building more, bigger, meaner, 10 times more. And when those fleets launched, the galaxy learned that fear can spread faster than light. The build-up. I didn't see Earth for almost 2 years after the Battle of Hades Gate. That's what they called it later, Hades Gate, because it was the place where hell came knocking for the Javer Dominion. After that victory, we didn't exactly go home. Command didn't want us anywhere near Earth. Not when we were now the most dangerous thing the galaxy had seen in centuries. We stayed out there in the black, patrolling, hunting, gathering every scrap of intel on the Dominion's movements. At first, I thought the Javer would come back hard. 8:1 odds hadn't been enough. Fine. I figured they'd throw 20-1 next time. I expected their fleets to come roaring into Sol space, shields up, guns blazing, determined to crush the upstart humans before we could do more damage. But they didn't. Instead, the Dominion went quiet. Not just pull back and regroup. Quiet. Dead quiet. Like they were afraid to even show themselves in the same sector as us. Our recon ships reported abandoned outposts, empty trade routes, and silent relay stations. They even shut down some of their frontier colonies, hauling their people deeper into Dominion space. That's when it hit me. We hadn't just beaten them. We'd scared them. Now, I'd been a Marine for over 20 years, and I'd learned something the hard way. Fear makes people stupid. They overreact. They make bad calls. And if you push just right, they'll break without you even needing to finish the fight. Apparently, Earth's brass had learned the same lesson. While we were out here, the big brains back home had been busy. Shipyards that had been on peacetime contracts were suddenly running 3 shifts, pumping out warships like factories on fire. Our old Mars yards, once too slow to keep up with expansion demand, were building new carriers twice the size of the Resolute. Luna Ship Works was forging battleships with armor so thick they didn't even bother designing escape pods, just lifeboats and last wills. The biggest surprise was Saturn's rings. Everyone thought they were just pretty to look at. Maybe a place for the odd mining rig. But turns out the Navy had been hiding something there. Deep in the shadows in Titan's orbit, a fleet construction dock so massive you could hide half an armada inside it. And that's exactly what they were doing. When the orders came down, our little task force rendezvoused at Titan. We'd been called home, not for rest, not for leave, but to join something bigger. I'll never forget the sight when we came around that moon. The dock's floodlights lit the black like sunrise, and in that glow, row after row of warships stood at anchor. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, cruisers, the works. 10 fleets, each one larger than the one we'd used to tear Hades Gate apart. It wasn't a navy anymore. It was an extinction machine. We docked and the old man, Captain Renford, called the crew together. He didn't do speeches often, but when he did, you listened. This isn't about defense anymore, he said. This is about ending the threat. The Dominion thinks we're a species they can intimidate. They think Hades Gate was our best shot. They're wrong. That was just us knocking politely. Now we're going to kick the door in. There was a moment of silence. Not because we were afraid, but because we were processing it. Earth wasn't just planning a counterstrike. They were planning a war to the knife. The kind where the only peace would be when one side was a memory. And judging by the steel in Renford's eyes, that memory was going to be theirs. The offensive. The build-up took months. I had plenty of time to walk the docks and take in what humanity had become in such a short time. Our destroyers were sleeker now, built for speed and knife fight range. The battleships looked like moving fortresses, bristling with enough firepower to level continents. The carriers were floating cities, each one carrying more strike craft than the Dominion had deployed at Hades Gate. The Resolute herself got an upgrade, new rail gun batteries, point defense arrays, and an experimental shield projector. We weren't just repairing her. We were turning her into something even deadlier. The mood among the crews was different. Before Hades Gate, there had been nerves, doubt. Guys wondered if we were biting off more than we could chew. Now, it was like watching wolves pacing before a hunt. Everyone knew what we were capable of. Everyone wanted another taste. Word filtered in about the Dominion's reaction. Apparently, their High Council had held an emergency session when they learned we were mobilizing. Some of their member species were already calling for peace talks. Others wanted to launch a preemptive strike before our new fleets deployed, but their leaders hesitated. They'd seen what a dozen human ships could do. They didn't want to find out what 100 could manage. That hesitation was their first mistake. When the launch orders came, they hit like an electric shock through the docks. All 10 fleets were moving out at once. Different targets, same goal, carve the Dominion's frontier apart and push straight into their heart. Fleet 1, ours, was heading for the Curran Corridor, a trade artery so vital to the Dominion that taking it would be like cutting off their air. Other fleets were aimed at shipyards, supply lines, and military hubs. The plan wasn't just to win battles. It was to break their spine in a single campaign. As we cleared Titan's shadow, the comm channels lit up with fleet chatter. I caught sight of the armadas stretching into the distance. Each formation a wall of steel and firepower. It was a sight that would have made most sane men wonder if we were going too far. But we weren't sane men anymore. We hit our first target 4 days later. The Curran Corridor's defense station was supposed to be impenetrable. 3 kilometers of armor, 6 shield generators, 30 heavy turrets. The Dominion had stationed a fleet there too. 40 warships, most of them battle-tested. They never stood a chance. Our battleships came in first. Guns hot. The Resolute and her sisters threaded between the enemy's firing arcs. Rail guns smashing shield nodes before the Dominion could react. Our fighters swarmed like angry bees, dropping plasma torpedoes into their engine housings. I remember targeting one of their heavy cruisers, watching its shields flare and collapse under sustained fire. I didn't even need to finish it. Another ship in our formation tore it in half with a broadside before I could fire again. The whole battle lasted 17 minutes. 17. We docked at the station afterward, not to take it, but to strip it bare. Anything useful got loaded onto our supply ships. Anything left got slagged so the Dominion couldn't take it back. The message was clear, nothing they built was safe anymore. By the end of the first week, all 10 fleets were reporting similar victories. Dominion shipyards were in flames. Their patrol fleets were in retreat. The High Council had gone silent again, no doubt scrambling to figure out what to do before we reached their core worlds. But fear is a disease, and it was spreading fast. We intercepted civilian chatter from deep inside their space, merchant ships rerouting away from human-controlled sectors, colonies fortifying themselves against attacks that hadn't even been ordered yet. Some of their smaller member species were openly talking about breaking away from the Dominion entirely. I could see the end already, not in days or weeks, but in the way their entire empire was starting to collapse under the weight of its own paranoia. We were tearing them apart without even having to fight every battle. And the best part? We were just getting started. I've been in a lot of wars. But this one was different. It wasn't about survival anymore. It wasn't about defending our home world. This was about dominance, about making sure the galaxy understood exactly what kind of species humanity was. We weren't prey. We weren't allies. We weren't even rivals. We were the thing you didn't provoke. The Dominion fractures. If you've never been in the enemy's war room, let me tell you, it's not that different from ours. Oh, sure. The Javar High Council chamber was all curved obsidian walls, shimmering light displays, and enough gold trim to make a Terran dictator blush. But the mood, that was familiar. Fear stinks the same, no matter the species. I wasn't actually there, not in person. But our intel boys had intercepted a live transmission from one of their own council relays. Someone inside the Dominion, someone high up, was leaking to us. We never found out who, but I like to think they'd seen Hades' Gate and decided backing us was better than dying with the rest of their empire. The feed came through our tactical display one night while the Resolute was still in the current corridor. We were halfway through stripping a defense platform when Renford had us assemble in the comms bay. The image flickered to life. 12 alien figures seated around a crescent table. Each one representing one of the Dominion's ruling species. They weren't arguing yet. They were doing that quiet, teeth-gritted thing politicians do right before a fight. The High Chancellor, a tall black-scaled brute with eyes like molten silver, finally spoke first. The human threat must be met now. We have waited too long. The current corridor has fallen. The war foundries of VE have fallen. Even the Yuri shipyards. He stopped because one of the others, a feathered creature with a long hooked beak, slammed its talons against the table. And whose fault is that? You insisted we withdraw after Hades' Gate. You said they would not advance further. From there, it devolved fast. Voices overlapped, claws scraped. One of the smaller counselors, a jelly-like being in a containment sphere, was practically vibrating as it shrieked about human barbarism and unrestrained violence. I caught Renford's eye. He was smirking. They're not united anymore, he murmured. They're fracturing. On the feed, a new voice cut through the noise. It was quieter, but sharper, like a knife drawn slow. Enough. This council will vote. Strike now with all available forces or sue for terms while we still have the fleets to defend our core. The vote was split. Half wanted to throw everything they had at us in one massive counterattack. The other half were already talking about peace, though the word sounded like poison on their tongues. In the end, they compromised, if you can call it that. They'd launch a counterstrike, but not against our full strength. They'd pick one fleet, one they thought they could isolate and crush to make an example. We found out later they chose us. The attack came 3 days later, just as we were pushing deeper along the current corridor. Our fleet had been moving fast, too fast for them to regroup, but they must have been watching. Must have found a gap. It started with a calm blackout. Our long-range channels jammed into static. Then our forward scouts went dark. The Resolute sensors picked up ghost readings, drive signatures just outside our detection net, moving in fast. Renford didn't panic. He didn't even raise his voice. Battle stations. Titan formation. Keep the destroyers on the outer ring. I ran to my gunnery station and pulled up the tactical feed. At first, I thought the readings had to be wrong. There were so many of them, capital ships, escorts, carrier groups. It was the largest single Dominion formation we'd seen yet. Easily over 100 warships, and all of them were headed straight for us. The opening salvo was hell. Their battleships came in hot, hurling plasma lances that burned white against the black. One of our destroyers, the ISS Griffin, took a direct hit and blew apart before they even got a second shot off. Fighters poured in from their carriers, darting between our lines like angry wasps. But here's the thing. The Dominion still hadn't learned. Humans don't break in the opening minutes. Renford's voice came over the comms, calm as if he were reading a weather report. Return fire. Break their left flank. Gunners, aim for shield nodes and engine housings. Make them choose between moving and staying alive. We followed orders. My rail guns locked onto a Dominion cruiser trying to swing in behind our formation. 2 shots and its shields went down like wet paper. A third shot split its engines wide open, venting drive plasma into space. The rest of the fleet fought like devils. Our destroyers weaved between enemy lines, dumping torpedoes into their carriers. Battleships laid down broadside salvos that made even their heavy cruisers buckle. And our fighters. God, those fighter pilots turned the void into a graveyard of enemy wreckage. Still, the numbers were bad. We'd started the fight outnumbered 3-1. And even with our edge in close-range brawling, they were grinding us down. The Dominion wasn't holding back. They wanted to bury us here in the dark and parade our wreckage across the galaxy as proof that humans could bleed. It was then, just when it looked like we might actually be pushed back, that the trap sprung. You see, Fleet 1 wasn't alone. Command had anticipated the Dominion might try something like this. 2 other human fleets, Fleets 4 and 6, had been shadowing us on divergent courses, just far enough out to avoid detection. When the Dominion moved in, they cut their drives cold, let inertia carry them into flanking positions, and then lit their engines right when the enemy was fully committed. The effect was biblical. Fleets 4 and 6 came screaming in from opposite vectors, weapons hot. Their opening volleys tore through the Dominion's rear ranks before the enemy even knew they were there. Suddenly, the hunters were surrounded. On the Resolute, I swung my guns toward the confusion in their back lines. The Dominion ships were breaking formation, some turning to fight the new arrivals, others trying to run. It didn't matter which they chose. Both paths ended with a human broadside waiting for them. One by one, their capital ships died. Their carriers, isolated and bleeding fighters, went up in blossoms of fire. We cut their battleships apart like meat. The fight lasted another 40 minutes. By the end, the void was thick with debris and drifting hulks. Out of the 100+ ships they'd thrown at us, fewer than 20 made it out alive. We didn't lose a single capital ship after the Griffin. A few destroyers and frigates, some fighter wings, yes, but the core of our fleet was intact, and we just annihilated their best shot at turning the war around. Later, over the comms, we picked up more intercepted chatter from inside the Dominion. Apparently, the High Chancellor himself had been aboard one of the retreating ships. He'd survived, but barely. And now his political enemies were circling like vultures, blaming him for underestimating humanity a second time. Renford called it right there. This war is over. They just don't know it yet. But here's the truth. I think some of them did know. We'd seen what fear looked like before. Now we were seeing what despair looked like. The Dominion had thrown their weight at us and found it wasn't enough. And when an empire built on conquest learns it's not the biggest predator in the forest, it starts to eat itself. That's what was coming. We wouldn't have to burn their worlds. They'd do it for us. The occupation. We didn't give them time to breathe. That was the first rule now. Never let the Dominion regroup. Never give them a moment to rebuild confidence. We'd learned something from predators back on Earth: once your prey starts running, you keep chasing until it drops. Command had shifted gears after the failed Dominion counterattack. The fleets weren't just hitting frontier systems anymore. We were moving into the marrow of their empire, core trade hubs, shipyards older than our species, fortified worlds they'd never imagined could fall. And they were falling. The Curran corridor became our highway straight into the heart of their supply lines. Every convoy we intercepted, every station we gutted was another artery cut. We didn't hold most of the territory we took. We didn't need to. The point wasn't occupation. It was strangulation. Our first core world raid was on Vihar Prime. According to the brief, it was a jewel of Dominion industry. Planet-wide factories shielded by an orbital defense ring and a garrison fleet of 30 capital ships. A year ago, I'd have called it suicide to attack something like that. Now, after months of victories, it just looked like another target. Fleet 1 came in under full burn, dropping out of FTL so close to their orbitals we could see the sunlight flash across the towers on the surface. The defense fleet moved to intercept, but they were too slow. Our battleships smashed through their formation in the first pass, scattering them like debris in a storm. We didn't bother with a siege. This wasn't about taking their factories. It was about denying them. We pounded the surface. Not indiscriminately. We targeted their foundries, ship assembly yards, and power grids. Our rail guns punched through the planet's defensive shield. And when the barriers dropped, our bombers went to work. Precision strikes, cold, surgical destruction. The Dominion's fleet didn't even try to defend the planet after the first hour. They ran. That was the new pattern. Every time we hit one of their untouchable worlds, the defenders were gone within the day. It was like the fight had been beaten out of them. But not everyone in the Dominion was willing to go down with the ship. We started getting signals from some of their member species. Back-channel offers, coded messages slipped into the calm noise. They wanted to talk. Not for peace, not exactly for defection. The first were the Urus, a reptilian species that had been one of the Dominion's early conquests. They'd supplied the Dominion with warships for centuries. Now they were offering to hand over their remaining fleets to us in exchange for protection when the whole thing collapsed. Command accepted. Of course, we weren't in the business of mercy, but we understood leverage. The Urus fleet joined ours within 2 weeks, giving us a dozen more capital ships and an entire network of their old military docks. Their defection sent a shockwave through the Dominion. Suddenly, everyone was wondering who'd be next to jump ship. The High Council's paranoia went into overdrive: purges, loyalty tests, executions. The kind of infighting you could smell from light years away. Our next major strike came at the Trosk Nexus, a Nexus station so massive it made our biggest carriers look like tugboats. It was the Dominion's central hub for FTL coordination in the sector. Without it, their fleets couldn't respond to our raids without adding days to their transit times. The Nexus was guarded by what was left of their elite, their black armored warships, the ones that had been in every major conquest for centuries. I'll admit, part of me thought this might finally be a real fight. It wasn't. The battle lasted less than an hour. They'd lost their edge. The moment our flanking squadrons hit them from 2 directions, their formation crumbled. The Resolute's guns took down one of their dreadnoughts in 5 shots. I can still see the explosion in my head. A bright bloom against the void, followed by the slow drift of a ship that had been a terror to 100 worlds. When the Nexus fell, we didn't destroy it. Command had other plans. We gutted its defenses and took it intact. It became our forward operating base, a spear planted deep in Dominion space. From there, we could hit anywhere in their core within days. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. We started finding abandoned cities on core worlds. Entire populations evacuated without a fight, factories left running, machines working with no one to oversee them. In some places, we found signs of internal battles, Dominion forces firing on their own civilians, probably to suppress rebellion. We didn't intervene in those fights. That wasn't our mission. We weren't there to save them. We were there to win. But I'll admit, there was something satisfying about watching them tear themselves apart. Every shot they fired at each other was one less aimed at us. We were 3 months into the core campaign when the Dominion finally tried something desperate. They called it the Scour Protocol. Our intel caught wind of it after we cracked a coded transmission between 2 high-ranking admirals. It was simple and brutal. If they couldn't hold a system, they'd burn it. Planetary bombardment, infrastructure destruction, even bioweapons. They wanted to leave nothing useful for us to take. The first world they tried it on was called Cav, a mining planet. 3 billion civilians, no real military presence. Fleet 3 had been en route to take it when they intercepted the Scour fleet. From what we heard, they didn't waste time on negotiation. They tore the Scour ships apart before they could finish deploying their payloads. Out of 20 Dominion vessels, only 2 escaped. After that, Command made the Scour Protocol a death sentence. Any Dominion ship caught carrying Scour weapons was destroyed on sight. No quarter. It didn't stop them from trying again. Desperation never makes people smarter. By now, the Dominion wasn't a united empire anymore. It was a patchwork of splintering factions. Some wanted to surrender. Some wanted to keep fighting no matter the cost. Some wanted to cut deals behind the Council's back. We exploited all of it. One of my favorite moments came when we intercepted a Dominion fleet headed to reinforce a core world garrison. Halfway through the battle, the enemy's own escort ships turned on their carriers. Blew them apart from inside the formation. They weren't ours. They were just done dying for the Council. They opened a channel mid-battle, told us they were withdrawing, and then jumped to deep space. We never saw them again. Renford liked to say we were past the tipping point. I think he was right. The war wasn't about who had the bigger fleet anymore. It was about will. And the Dominion's will was gone. The only question left was how far Command was willing to push. Were we stopping at breaking their fleets, or were we going to wipe the Dominion off the map entirely? The answer came in a closed briefing on the Resolute. Renford called the senior officers into the wardroom, locked the hatch, and pulled up the new orders. We weren't stopping. The next phase was planetary. Not raids, not strikes, occupations. Core worlds would be taken, garrisons established, their industry turned to our use. We weren't just going to beat them, we were going to own them. I didn't know it then, but that decision would change the tone of the war. Raids were clean. You hit, you left, you didn't have to see the aftermath. Occupations, those got messy. And I had the feeling things were about to get messier than any of us had signed up for. They called the target Kalemore. It was no fortress world, no deep space shipyard, no battle-ready garrison. On paper, it was just another Dominion core planet, heavy on industry, light on military presence. But it was our first real occupation order. That made it different. For months, we'd been cutting the Dominion spine with hit-and-run raids. Strike, destroy, move on. Now, the orders were simple: take Kalemore, hold it, strip it for resources, and make sure the Dominion never took it back. This was going to be a ground war. Fleet 1 hit orbit on a cold morning. At least it was morning for them down there. We broke their orbital defense grid in minutes. Their handful of capital ships didn't even get the chance to run. The Resolute's rail guns cored them before they cleared the upper atmosphere. From high orbit, Kalemore looked beautiful. Sweeping oceans, massive green continents, sprawling cities that shone like jewels in the sunlight. But beauty's got nothing to do with survival. The first wave went in hard. Dropships loaded with Marines, armored walkers, and enough heavy ordnance to level half the city blocks if we needed to. I was with the second wave assigned to secure the southern industrial district in Kalemore's capital. The drop was rough. Anti-air fire wasn't heavy, but it was enough to make the sky light up like a storm. One of our transports took a hit and spiraled into the ocean. No survivors. The rest of us came in low, weaving through the towers until we touched down on the landing pads outside the factories. We hit resistance right away. Dominion infantry, light armor, plasma rifles, and the kind of grit you only see when people are defending their own streets. They didn't have the numbers to stop us, but they weren't trying to stop us. They were trying to bleed us. Every corner was an ambush. Every rooftop had a sniper. They'd let us take a block, then hit our supply line from behind. We fought for 20 hours straight before we could even set up a perimeter. That was the first taste of it. Occupation wasn't like ship-to-ship combat. Up there, it was clean. You never saw the people you killed. You just saw the wreckage drift by. Down here, it was different. We kicked down doors and found families huddled in basements. We cleared apartment blocks that still smelled like breakfast cooking in the kitchens. We saw the faces of the people who hated us. Not soldiers, not politicians, just civilians who'd been told we were the monsters coming to burn their world. And maybe they weren't wrong. By the end of the first week, we had the capital locked down. The factories were under our control. The port secured, the spaceport cleared for our resupply runs. But holding a city isn't the same as owning it. The Dominion knew it. The civilians knew it. And we knew it. The insurgency started almost immediately. They didn't fight us head-on. They didn't have to. Bombs under our patrol routes, assassinations of our liaison officers, sabotage in the factories. One night, they hit us with a chain of coordinated attacks. Blew 3 fuel depots, sniped a comms relay team, and planted explosives in one of our barracks. We lost 23 Marines before dawn. Command's response was as blunt as you'd expect. Renford called an emergency meeting in the Kalemore Governor's Palace, now our forward command. He didn't bother sitting. "We aren't here to win hearts and minds," he said flatly. "We're here to secure this planet and strip it for everything it's worth. If they want to fight, we make it too costly to even think about." Orders came down for curfews, checkpoints, and search and seizure sweeps. Any sector that produced insurgent attacks got locked down under martial law. We were told to detain anyone suspected of collaboration, and detain didn't always mean they'd make it to a holding cell. Some of the younger Marines flinched at those orders. Most didn't. We'd all been in this war long enough to understand that mercy wasn't part of the playbook anymore. The worst fighting came in the southern slums where the Dominion military had left caches of weapons before retreating. The locals fought us there for 3 weeks straight. They weren't soldiers, but they fought like they had nothing to lose. We brought in armored walkers to clear the streets. They brought in scavenged plasma launchers to knock them out. Every time we thought we had them cornered, they slipped into the sewer tunnels and came up 3 blocks away. One night, I was leading a patrol through those tunnels when we walked straight into an ambush. They'd set up in the dark. No lights, just the glow of their rifles when they opened up. We lost 2 men in the first few seconds. I took a hit to my armor plate, burned through the outer layer, but stopped just short of my ribs. We returned fire in short bursts, using the muzzle flashes to track them. It was brutal, claustrophobic fighting. When it was over, the floor was slick, and the air was so thick with burned ozone and blood, you could taste it. We started using informants after that. Kalemore had its share of people who didn't care who ruled them as long as they got paid. A few credits, a promise of food, and they'd tell us where the insurgents were hiding. It worked sometimes. Other times it was a setup and we'd walk into another kill zone. Trust was a currency no one could afford here. After 2 months, the Dominion Central Command stopped trying to retake Kalemore. They'd written it off. But the insurgents didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. One morning they hit the main power station for the entire capital. Blew the generators, cutting electricity to our command posts, our barracks, and half the civilian districts. Renford's orders were simple: take it back at any cost. We went in with everything. Armor, infantry, air support. The fight for that station lasted 46 hours. We lost 38 Marines, 3 walkers, and 2 drop ships before we cleared it. When it was over, we didn't rebuild it. We fortified it. Every approach was mined. Every rooftop within firing distance was flattened. By month 3, Kalemore wasn't the same planet we'd landed on. The skyline was scarred with blackened towers. Half the factories were shut down or running under our direct supervision. The streets were empty after curfew, and the people who did walk them moved with their eyes down, not meeting ours. We'd won, if you could call it that. Thing was, this was just one planet, one occupation. The Dominion had dozens more worlds like it. If this was the new phase of the war, we were going to be fighting like this for years. Some of the men started to question it. Not out loud, not where command could hear, but in quiet conversations in the barracks. We'd signed up to defend Earth, not grind a foreign empire into the dirt, one city at a time. Me. I didn't waste time on questions. Orders were orders. But even I could feel it. This was different from the clean victories in space. Occupation got into your head. You couldn't fire and forget the way you could with a rail gun from orbit. Down here, every fight had a face, and some of those faces stayed with you. By the time Fleet 1 was rotated out for refit and rest, Kalemore was locked down tight. The insurgency wasn't gone, but it was bleeding. We handed control over to Fleet 7's ground forces, and they'd keep the screws turning while we went back into the void. When we lifted off, I looked down at the city from the dropship window. Smoke still rose from the southern slums. Patrols moved in tight formation along the avenues. Beautiful planet, I thought. Shame about the people. The final push. Coming back to space after Kalemore felt like stepping out of a nightmare and back into a familiar kind of hell. Up here, everything was simple again. The enemy was a blip on a screen, a shape in the void. You pointed the guns, pulled the trigger, and moved on. No faces, no civilians, no screaming in the rubble. But the war had changed us. Before Kalemore, Fleet 1 still thought of itself as the tip of the spear. Sharp, clean, efficient. Now we weren't just a weapon anymore. We were an occupation force. We'd spent months patrolling streets instead of open space, staring down frightened civilians instead of enemy fleets. It left a taste in the mouth that no victory could wash away. You could see it in the crew. Marines who'd once joked on mess duty now ate in silence. Pilots who'd bragged about their kills stopped counting. Even Renford, steady as bedrock, had a new edge in his voice during briefings. Shorter, sharper, less patient. It wasn't fatigue. It was something else, something heavier. Our new orders were to push deeper into Dominion core space, target major fleet hubs, and if possible, force their leadership into talks. Command didn't phrase it as a surrender demand, but everyone knew that's where it was headed. The Dominion was bleeding fleets faster than they could build them. Their supply lines were fractured. Member species were bailing out. It was only a matter of time before their High Council had to choose between bending the knee or dying on it. Our first target post-Kalemore was the Vasker shipyards. On paper, this was the jewel of their military industry. A ring station the size of a small moon, bristling with dry docks, foundries, and launch cradles. Dominion engineers had been building ships here for centuries. We didn't plan to occupy it. We were going to take it apart piece by piece. The approach was textbook. Fleet 1 dropped out of FTL in tight formation. Battleships in front, carriers tucked behind, destroyers fanning wide for interception. The station's defensive grid came online instantly. Massive plasma turrets locking onto our lead ships. Renford didn't give them time to fire. All batteries, concentrate fire on turret clusters Bravo through Delta. Carriers, scramble strike wings. The first volley from our rail guns punched through 3 of their main turrets before the Dominion even got a full salvo off. Fighters tore into their point defense arrays, opening gaps for the bombers to slip through. The station didn't fall quietly. Dominion warships surged out of the dry docks, throwing themselves into the fight before they were even fully crewed. Some of them were so fresh their hull paint was still wet. It didn't matter. We shredded them. When it was over, the Vasker shipyards were nothing but twisted metal and drifting slag. We left their debris in orbit as a monument and a warning. The victory felt empty. The crew barely cheered. Even the pilots came back to the carriers without the usual swagger. It wasn't that the fight hadn't been satisfying. It was that it hadn't been a challenge. The Dominion wasn't meeting us blow for blow anymore. They were dying in pieces. Some of the older veterans started whispering about overkill. Not out of pity, none of us had that left for the Dominion, but out of the cold calculation that maybe we didn't need to crush them this hard. Thing was, Command didn't see it that way. The more the Dominion bled, the more they wanted. The first hint of surrender came 2 weeks later. We'd been tracking a Dominion courier ship through the Curran corridor, expecting it to lead us to another retreating fleet. Instead, it cut engines and broadcast a tight beam message directly to our flagship. The transmission was from one of the High Council's secondary envoys. He claimed to be speaking unofficially without the Chancellor's approval. The Dominion was open to discussions, he said, but only if Earth agreed to halt core world strikes. Renford had the comm tech mute him halfway through. You tell them we'll talk when they're ready to send someone who can sign the surrender. Until then, we keep hitting their worlds. The envoy didn't reply. The courier ship jumped to FTL and vanished. After that, it became a game of mixed signals. One day, we'd get an intercepted message from the High Council calling us butchers and swearing they'd never bow. The next, we'd find whispers from a provincial governor offering to defect in exchange for safe harbor. It was the kind of confusion you only get when an empire's falling apart at the top. Meanwhile, the lines between soldier and conqueror kept blurring. On one raid into the Vex system, our boarding parties found a Dominion freighter loaded with food supplies for a refugee fleet. Technically, the refugees weren't a military target. They weren't even part of the fight. Command ordered us to seize the supplies anyway. Logistics officers didn't care where the food came from. It was going to feed our troops on occupied worlds. I saw the look on the freighter captain's face when we boarded. Tall, insectoid, eyes like molten gold. He didn't plead, didn't fight. He just stood there while we stripped his cargo holds bare. When it was over, he walked back into the crew quarters and shut the hatch. Didn't open it again. That was becoming the new war. We weren't just killing fleets anymore. We were cutting the Dominion's people off from everything they needed to survive. Fuel, food, water, medicine. It all became fair game. If it kept their ships from moving or their factories from running, we took it. Some called it strategy, some called it cruelty. I stopped calling it anything. It was just the job now. 3 months into the core campaign, the Dominion finally made a public move toward negotiation. It happened after Fleet 3 took the Vaughn Relay, a key FTL hub connecting half their remaining strongholds. The High Chancellor himself broadcast a message across open channels. He didn't use the word surrender. He called it a mutual cessation of hostilities. He wanted a ceasefire, territory freezes, and recognition of Dominion sovereignty over what remained of their core worlds. Renford watched the broadcast without a word, then had it replayed in the wardroom. "This isn't an offer," he said when it was over. "It's a stalling tactic. They want to buy time to rebuild what we've broken. Command won't bite." He was right. The answer from Earth came back within the day, no negotiations until full and unconditional surrender. The Chancellor's broadcast went silent. Dominion propaganda started calling us extinctionists. Maybe they weren't wrong. That's when the tone in the fleet shifted again. Some officers started talking openly about wiping the Dominion out completely. Not just dismantling the Empire, but erasing it from the star maps. No more core worlds. No more High Council. No more anything. Others warned that going that far would make us the new tyrants. It didn't matter. The people making the calls back on Earth had already decided. We weren't stopping until the Dominion couldn't get back up. The next set of orders was proof enough. Coordinated strikes on every remaining shipyard, relay station, and military command center in Dominion space. We weren't waiting for them to come to the table anymore. We were going to take the table, break it, and burn the pieces. Fleet One's part in it would take us right to the edge of their capital world. Renford didn't sugarcoat it during the briefing. This is the final push. They've got nothing left to throw at us except whatever's defending their home world. Once that's gone, the war's over one way or another. And I remember thinking, one way or another didn't necessarily mean we were walking away as the heroes. They called it Velthor Prime, the Dominion's cradle world, the seat of their High Council, the planet they swore no foreign fleet would ever see, much less threaten. And now Fleet One was staring at it through the forward viewport. We didn't come alone. 3 human fleets had rendezvoused at the edge of the capital system, Fleet 1, Fleet 2, and Fleet 6. Behind us, the remains of the Urus defectors and 2 other Dominion breakaway factions hung back in support. Their ships patched together with human tech. The Dominion knew we were coming. You could feel it in the calm silence. In the way the capital system bristled with defense satellites, fortified stations, and minefields so thick our sensor displays lit up like someone had scattered broken glass across the void. This wasn't going to be another quick kill. This was their Alamo. Renford's voice carried over fleet-wide comms before we moved in. This is the last fight, gentlemen. You've all seen what they do to the worlds they take. You've all buried friends they've killed. Remember that. Today we break them or we don't come home at all. The tone wasn't bravado. It wasn't even anger. It was cold and absolute. The kind of voice a man uses when he's already decided the only outcome worth living for is total victory. We jumped first to the outer edge of the minefield. Fleet Success destroyers moved in to clear a path, picking off mines with pinpoint gunfire. A few detonated prematurely, sending shockwaves through the black, but nothing that slowed the advance. Once the first lane was open, the battleships surged forward, guns already warming. The Dominion fleet met us halfway. What was left of it? They still had numbers. God, they had numbers. Carriers, cruisers, battleships, and a handful of massive dreadnoughts we hadn't seen before. Hulking slabs of armor with spinal plasma cannons that could gut a capital ship in one hit. But we had something they didn't anymore, momentum. The first exchange was brutal. Dominion plasma fire lanced through the black, carving molten wounds in the hull of one of Fleet 2's lead battleships. Our rail guns and missile batteries answered in kind, shattering the shields on 2 enemy carriers and setting their flight decks aflame. Fighter wings swarmed the space between the fleets. A storm of flares, tracers, and burning wreckage. Pilots died by the dozen on both sides. The comms were a mess of clipped orders, frantic warnings, and death calls. I locked the Resolute's main guns onto one of the new dreadnoughts. Its shields were thick, but the rail guns chewed through them after 6 salvos. Once the armor was exposed, we raked it with concentrated fire until the hull split like a cracked bone. The explosion lit the void for a full 5 seconds. Still, the Dominion didn't break. Every kilometer we pushed forward, they fought harder. The battle dragged into its 3rd hour. The fleets weaving and slamming into each other like brawlers locked in a clinch. Fleet 6 took the brunt of it. 2 of their carriers destroyed, 3 battleships crippled, but every ship they lost bought us another step toward Velar Prime. By the 5th hour, we'd smashed their first defensive ring. Their fleet was pulling back toward the 2nd, regrouping around a cluster of orbital fortresses that looked like jagged obsidian towers bristling with guns. That's when the High Chancellor finally spoke. The transmission hit every channel at once. His image filled our display. Tall, black-scaled, those molten silver eyes glaring like he could burn through the screen. "Humans," he said, his voice a low growl. "You think victory is yours because you have slaughtered your way here, but you will not set foot on Velar Prime. This is where you end." Renford didn't even blink. "You had your chance to surrender months ago. Now we finish it." The Chancellor's jaw tightened. Then the channel cut. They came at us again. Every remaining ship in the system. No more defensive lines. No more fallback positions. Just a wall of steel and firepower hurtling straight at us. It was chaos. Point-blank engagements between capital ships. Boarding actions as desperate Dominion crews tried to take our flagships from the inside. Fleet 2 lost another battleship when a Dominion cruiser rammed it head-on, tearing both ships apart in a spray of molten debris. We gave as good as we got. Fleet 1's destroyers gutted 2 enemy carriers in the first 15 minutes of the renewed assault. Our bombers swarmed their dreadnoughts like hornets, hammering their weak points until the big ships bled themselves apart. Still, the cost was mounting. An hour into the final push, we punched through their last fleet formation. The void between us and Velar Prime's orbit was clear except for the orbital fortresses. Renford ordered every gun in range to focus fire. The fortresses were tough, their shields holding against the first volleys, but under the combined fire of 3 human fleets, they fell one by one. When the last fortress split open, we had an unobstructed line to the planet. That's when the real choice came down. Command back on Earth had sent us sealed orders before the battle, only to be opened if we reached this point. Renford cracked them on the bridge, his expression unreadable as he scanned the text. Then he looked up, eyes like cold iron. "Earth wants us to glass the surface." Nobody said anything at first. Then someone, one of the junior officers, spoke up. "Sir, that's the capital. Billions of civilians." Renford didn't answer right away. His gaze swept the bridge, taking in each of us. "The order is clear. Total planetary bombardment. No survivors. No chance for them to rebuild." It wasn't a shock. Not really. Everyone in the fleet knew there were people back on Earth who wanted the Dominion erased completely. But hearing it out loud here with the planet in sight, that was different. The bridge went quiet except for the low hum of the Resolute systems. My hand stayed on the gunnery controls, but I didn't touch them. I'd killed more Dominion soldiers than I could count. But this was something else. Renford finally broke the silence. "Prepare the bombardment protocols. But until I give the order, we hold fire." No one argued. Down on Velar Prime, the orbital view showed cities glittering under the clouds. Even from space, you could see the layout. Sprawling metropolises, vast industrial complexes, sprawling green belts. It was the beating heart of their empire. Destroying it would end the Dominion. No question. But it would also burn our names into history as the species that committed genocide to win. The High Chancellor opened a channel again, his face strained now, his voice raw. "You want this world? Then take it. But you will never erase us. If you burn Velar Prime, we will haunt your species for the rest of your existence. Renford didn't reply immediately. I could see the weight of it on him. This was the moment. Do we pull the trigger or do we give them one last chance to surrender? The decision. That's where we stood. 3 fleets in orbit, guns locked on the Dominion's home world, the fate of billions hanging on a single word from our captain. The Resolute's bridge was silent except for the faint hum of the reactors and the occasional ping of the targeting systems locking onto new coordinates below. Velar Prime filled half the viewport. An ocean and continent marble wrapped in slow-rolling clouds. It would have been beautiful if you could forget what it stood for. This was the throne world of the Dominion. Every order of conquest, every campaign of subjugation, every slaughter that had fueled their empire had begun here. I had no love for it. No one on the bridge did. But hate and duty are 2 different things. And now the 2 were staring each other in the face. Renford stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the planet like a man weighing a stone in his palm, deciding if it's worth throwing. He turned toward us. Command's orders are clear, he said, voice low but steady. They want Velar Prime gone. But I didn't bring you all the way here just to follow orders without thinking. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. We could end them now, he continued. 1 order and they're finished. But we'd be burning billions of civilians. The history books will remember that. And so will the survivors, if there are any. You all know what that means. I knew. We all did. The Dominion was broken. But hatred doesn't need a fleet to survive. All it needs is memory. If we glassed the planet, every surviving Dominion species would carry that memory like a knife in the dark. Renford's eyes found mine for a moment. I didn't nod, didn't shake my head. I was a gunnery sergeant. My job was to fire when told, but part of me hoped he wouldn't give the order. The High Chancellor came back on the line. His voice was rougher now, stripped of the pride it had carried hours ago. Captain Renford, I will give you this once. Velar Prime will surrender unconditionally. My fleet will stand down. Our weapons will be powered down, but you will spare the planet. Renford didn't look at the screen. He just asked, and if I don't? Then you will kill billions, and you will create an enemy you can never destroy. We will teach our children your name, and they will teach theirs until the day comes when we can repay you in full. Renford didn't answer right away. He shut off the comm and turned back to us. Open fleet-wide channel. The comms officer nodded and Renford's voice went out to every ship in the Armada. This is Captain Renford. The Dominion's capital is within our guns. Command has ordered us to destroy it. The Chancellor has offered unconditional surrender if we spare it. This is the decision. We either wipe them out or we take their surrender and end the war. I'm making the call. He paused, long enough for every man and woman on those ships to lean forward, to hold their breath. We take the surrender. There was no cheer, just a collective exhale across the fleet. Relief, maybe. Or just the end of the waiting. Renford reopened the channel to the Chancellor. Transmit your surrender to our flagship. Any resistance from your fleet, any sign of weapons coming online, and we end you. Understand? Understood, the Chancellor said. And for the first time, I believed him. The surrender came through minutes later. Every ship in orbit powered down its weapons. Ground defenses on the planet went dark. The High Council transmitted a formal statement recognizing Earth's authority over all former Dominion territories. It was over. Occupation was different this time. We didn't land like conquerors. We landed like wardens. Velar Prime was too valuable to burn and too dangerous to leave unattended. Marine detachments spread through the capital in tight formations. The people didn't cheer, but they didn't fight either. Some just stared at us like we were ghosts walking in daylight. I walked through their central plaza that first day, past the black monolith that marked their empire's founding. The plaque at its base listed every species they'd conquered. I wondered if someday another plaque would list us. Fleet 1 stayed in orbit for 3 months while occupation forces locked the planet down. We intercepted a few small uprisings. Nothing serious. The Dominion didn't have the means to resist anymore, but peace didn't come clean. We learned quickly that an empire this size doesn't just vanish, it fractures. Petty warlords rose on the fringe worlds. Former allies of the Dominion turned on each other. When Fleet 1 finally got orders to return to Sol, it felt unreal. 2 years of war and now we were heading home. We formed up with the other fleets, ships scarred and patched from dozens of battles, and made the jump. The return to Earth wasn't the parade I'd pictured back when this started. Oh, there were celebrations, sure, but they were muted. The people saw the victory. We saw the cost. Some of the crew didn't even go planetside. Too many memories, too many faces from Kalemore, from the refugee ships, from every airless battlefield we'd left behind. Renford didn't make speeches. He just said, "You did your jobs. You came home." That was enough. Months later, the official history started coming out. They called it the 10 Fleets Campaign, the war that broke the Dominion. Some called it humanity's greatest triumph. They didn't write about the kids we saw in Kalemore streets, or the freighter captain who shut himself in his quarters while we stripped his ship. They didn't write about the hesitation in Renford's eyes over Velar Prime, or the silence that followed his decision. History doesn't like gray. It prefers clean victories. As for me, I stayed in, got promoted. There was always another deployment. Peacekeeping missions, hunting down rogue Dominion warlords, escorting supply convoys to occupied systems. The war was over. But the job wasn't. Sometimes I'd pass a planet we'd hit during the campaign. And I'd wonder if they remembered my ship, my guns. I'd wonder if they told their kids about the humans who came from the black and decided their fate in a single day. I think they do. And maybe that's what victory really means. Not parades, not medals, not clean endings. Just being the one left standing when the killing stops. The last time I saw Renford, we were both in orbit over a fringe system, watching a small Dominion colony sign over control to a local governor we'd backed. He looked older, lines deeper, hair grayer, but his eyes were the same. Still cold, still steady. "You ever think about Velar Prime?" I asked him. He didn't look at me when he answered. "Every damn day." The galaxy called it peace. But for those of us who fought it, peace was just a word. What we had was quiet. And quiet doesn't last forever. That's the end of the war and the start of whatever comes next. Because if history's taught me anything, it's that someone somewhere is always waiting to test the apex predator. And when they do, I hope they remember, one fleet was enough to terrify them. Then Earth unleashed 10.